Right, we're back on air.
A very warm welcome to episode 6 of Once Upon a Time in the Ashes. We are seeking out and celebrating the one Ashes Test wonders. We've heard from the fast bowlers, the spinners and the opening batsmen. Now it's time to turn our attention to the beating heart of the team, crouching, hidden behind the stumps, ready to pounce and snaffle at a moment's notice. It's our wicket-keepers special featuring Paul Gibb, Arthur Mcintyre, Keith Andrew and the New South Wales legend Brian Tabor. Last time around on Once Upon a Time in the Ashes, we heard from our most capped one Ashes Test wonder, Pat Pocock, and what a fantastic interview that was with some fascinating stories. Today's featured guest, Brian Tabor, played his one Ashes Test in the same series as Pat in 1968, but he too was more than a mere flash in the pan, featuring 16 times in Tests for Australia in total. And Brian was certainly glad to include a Test against England in that number.
I'm so rapt that I did play a Test in England. It was really a great thrill to play, and it also gave me the opportunity for my wife and I to come over there for the Centenary Test, because I played a Test there. That was a wonderful event, and catching up with all the English players as well. And the Poms did us royally over there. We had plenty of gin and tonics.
We'll hear more from Brian soon. First of all, let's hear about these intrepid English wicket-keepers. But I must warn you, this is X-rated stuff. It's a calamitous, torturous affair for our three glovemen down under. And who better to serve as our tour guide than the cricket writer and historian, Stephen Chalke.
The first three tours of Australia after the war, in each case Godfrey Evans went as one of the two wicket-keepers, and the first Test was played at Brisbane. Three of the England cricketers who only played once against Australia all played in the first Test at Brisbane on those tours. The second wicket-keeper on the tour, Paul Gibb in 46-7, Arthur Mcintyre in 50-51, and Keith Andrew in 54-55. Three more disastrous Test matches for England are hard to imagine.
Sounds intriguing. Let's start with Paul Gibb of Yorkshire, Cambridge University and Essex. He played 8 Tests in total for England and toured Australia in 1946-7.
Many people thought England should not have gone to Australia that soon after the war, because cricket had only just got going again. We didn't have young players and we weren't quite ready to start playing a Test series against Australia again. But in the euphoria of the end of the war, we agreed to accept the invitation and went out. But inevitably, we went out with quite an old team. There were men over the age of 40. And worse, they'd all been living under rationing in England for months. And when they got to Australia, where there was no rationing, one player said on one occasion that the meal was more than he ate in a week in England. Not long into the tour, the waistlines were starting to expand. This was not good for the cricket. They got to Brisbane, the first Test match. At this stage, Paul Gibb was the first choice wicket-keeper. An interesting character. He'd been to St Edward's, Oxford, a public school, and to Cambridge University, and played as an amateur for Yorkshire. And he played some Tests before the war, including a century against South Africa in the timeless Test. And he was going as the number one wicket-keeper with the young Godfrey Evans as his deputy. He wasn't that good a wicket-keeper. I don't think anybody would pretend that. But he offered a bit in the batting, which at that stage, having had Les Ames as the England wicket-keeper before the war, they still liked the idea of a wicket-keeper who offered quite a lot with the bat. So he was preferred to Godfrey Evans at Brisbane. And Brisbane, the first Test of the series, played right up in Queensland in tropical conditions. Australia batted first. And on the Saturday evening, at the end of the second day, they'd reached 595 for 5, with a fairly poor England fielding performance, with Paul Gibb not distinguishing himself greatly behind the stumps. And then the weather broke. There was rain on Monday, and further rain on Tuesday, a tropical rainstorm with hail falling the size of golf balls. By the time England resumed their first innings, the pitch was an absolute sticky. We were bowled out for 141 and 172, 15 wickets falling in a day, with Paul Gibb scoring 13 and 11. Comment was made about his wicket-keeping not being great, and in came Godfrey Evans for the second test match, and Paul Gibb never played another test. Godfrey Evans kept wicket for over 1,000 runs scored by Australia before he conceded his first bye, made an immediate good impression. He was the youngest member of the tour party at the age of 26, and Paul Gibb retired from cricket at the end of the tour. The coda to that is that he came back as a professional, keeping wicket and playing for Essex for 6 years in the 1950s. First ever university blue to turn professional, which in those days was very unacceptable in certain circles. And he was asked to resign his MCC membership and played 6 years with Essex, and then became an umpire for 10 years, travelled round in a caravan, then disappeared off the scene. And when he died 11 years later, he'd become a bus driver in Guildford. Somebody went to his funeral and heard at the funeral that at a young age he'd been diagnosed with a serious heart problem and told to take no energetic exercise of any sort. Right. And yet he spent his life playing cricket and squash, lived to the age of 64.
So Australia was not exactly a field of dreams for poor old Paul Gibb. Things would surely get better in 50-51 for Arthur Mcintyre of Surrey.
England went to Australia with their third choice captain, as both Norman Yardley and George Mann had said that they weren't available, that they had to work through the winter. So Freddie Brown was appointed as the captain. He himself was 40 during that winter, but he took stock and decided that he wanted to go with a young team. He would win the Ashes with youngsters. That was the way to win in Australia. So he went out with a whole lot of players who were very inexperienced, including several of the batsmen, Brian Close, David Shepherd, Gilbert Parkhouse, John Dews, leaving behind Bill Edrich, Jack Robertson, Gimblett, Brooks, Hardstaff, a whole lot of experienced cricketers. This is the first tour after Bradman's retirement, and there's a feeling that perhaps Australia aren't now quite as strong. Alas, none of those young batsmen came good. And when it got to select the team for the first test at Brisbane, they took the rather bizarre decision to pick Arthur Mcintyre, the reserve wicket-keeper, as a specialist batsman. Arthur Mack was pencilled into the team at number 6. His highest first-class score on the tour at that stage was 32 not out. Brisbane, they lost the toss. Australia batted. Godfrey Evans is keeping wicket. Arthur Mack is playing as a specialist batsman in the field. The game takes an unexpected turn on the first day because England, who've shown no form up to that stage, bowled Australia out for 228. Then the storms broke. No play on Saturday. The pitch started to dry out Sunday, then more torrential rain. And by the time they started an hour late on the Monday, the pitch was sticky, very sticky. And followed the most extraordinary day's play in the whole history of Ashes cricket. England got to lunch 28 for no wicket. But within the hour, they were 68 for 7, with the ball flying or shooting, the bounce very uneven. Knowing how difficult it was, Freddie Brown declared and put Australia back in. Australia batted for an hour, in which they lost wickets rapidly and were 32 for 7, when they in turn declared in order to get England back in before the pitch dried out. Further complication was that Freddie Brown summoned up the heavy roller. He reckoned that for the last hour and a half when they had to bat, if he could put the heavy roller over it, they might be able to get through without too much damage. But at that time, for the last time in an Ashes test, the Brisbane heavy roller was horse-drawn, and there was only a 10-minute break between the innings, and it took a fair bit of the 10 minutes to get the horse tethered up to the roller, and the rolling was not very substantial. So they went out to bat on a pitch that was still extremely difficult. The object of the exercise was to survive. Simpson was out first ball, and then they dug in, and things were going a little better. But Brown decided to keep Hutton and Compton back for the next day and was sending in other batsmen just to play out time on this difficult wicket. They only had 190 odd to win, knowing that if they could get through to the morrow and they had wickets in hand with Hutton and Compton to bat, they had a pretty good chance of winning the game. So here we are. We've had a day. 68 for 7 declared, 32 for 7 declared, England back in, with the light fading fast. There was probably the worst quarter of an hour in the whole history of England-Australia Ashes tests, as far as England was concerned. Wickets started to fall, and bad wickets. Bedser spooned a catch. Bailey hooked a long hop straight down the throat of square leg. And Arthur Mcintyre, playing in an Ashes test for the first time, went out to bat at number 7, just a few minutes before stumps, at 23 for 5. He hit a 4 off the leg-breaking googly bowler, Jack Iverson, and then he paddled round to leg that ran towards the boundary, and he and Godfrey Evans ran 3. But the throw started to come in, and it wasn't a good throw, and Arthur Mack decided to come back for a 4th. And this is how he described it to me. I hit Iverson down to square leg, a fair way. A chap named Johnson chased it. We'd run 3 easy runs, and we went for the 4th. This chap threw the ball in. It missed the stumps by quite a bit. Don Talon, their keeper, backed away from the wicket, took the ball, threw it at the stumps, and it hit them. And I was out, run out, going for a 4th. Christ, if I could have walked off the ground the other way and not had to face Freddie Brown, I would have done. Arthur Mack was a little chap, and he scuttled up and down the wicket. And at Surrey, where he played, his running between the wickets was not universally popular in the team. There was a chap called Jack Parker, who was built rather like a great ship, who would struggle to run and turn and run back. He was forever getting into run-out situations with Arthur Mack and got very frustrated running with him. Now, Jack Parker was at home in South London on the morning when Arthur Mack was playing for England at Brisbane, and he got up out of bed early, came downstairs into the front room and turned on the radio to see how it was going, sitting on his own in the front room. When the run-out occurred, he let out a long and loud series of expletives, effing, bloody, and this went on, shouting away in his armchair downstairs in the front room. And unknown to him, his young daughter had crept down the stairs and was sitting on the staircase just outside the room, heard all this, went back up to her mother and said, "What does Daddy mean by F this and B that?" And the atmosphere in the house was very frosty for several days afterwards.
That Brisbane Test of 1950 must surely rank as one of the most incredible of all time. And from an English wicket-keeping perspective, things are going from bad to worse.
Well, we roll on another 4 years to another Brisbane Test, 1954-55. Len Hutton, now the England captain. What turned out to be a wonderful series for England, but not a wonderful game at Brisbane. He took the extraordinary decision, having won the toss, to put Australia into bat, and they made over 600. The fielding performance was fairly catastrophic. It was thought that about 12 chances were missed. Dennis Compton, fielding on a ball on the boundary, damaged his hand and was injured. Godfrey Evans had heat stroke and was unable to play in the game at the last minute. So Keith Andrew, the young reserve wicket-keeper, suddenly found on the morning of the game that he was pitched into this test match. As the reserve wicket-keeper, he hadn't done an awful lot of keeping on the tour up to that point. And he'd only played one summer of county cricket. He'd never kept wicket for more than 6 hours in an innings in his life. But there he was for more than 2 days, keeping wicket in this Brisbane heat. And my God, it was hot, that game. In the third over of the match, he had to stand up to Alec Bedser. And Alec Bedser was a lively, fast medium bowler who cut the ball. He had this leg cutter, and he wasn't easy to stand up to. Arthur Mack was a wonderful keeper to Alec Bedser, but Keith had only kept to him about once so far on the tour. And in the third over of the match, Arthur Morris, a left-hander, had got an inside edge onto a ball which had gone down to Keith's right, and he hadn't caught it. And Keith, who was an outstanding wicket-keeper, he looked back on it in later life and said it wasn't really a catch that a keeper could get. That kind of deflection when you're standing up to the stumps is very difficult to take. But very quickly, he became the fall guy of the whole game. They said, oh, if he'd caught Morris when he was naught, it would have set the standard for the day. Godfrey would have caught it. Morris went on and scored 153. And by the second day, Keith was really struggling. It was very hot. He said to me, the sweat was pouring from my brow. I could taste the salt in it. And I remember walking down the pitch from the pavilion end and noticing a sign over the top of the sight screen. Atlantic, it said in huge red letters. It was a brand of petrol, I think. And I started to think of the Atlantic Ocean and the beaches in Cornwall, where we'd been going to have our honeymoon. My concentration was in tatters. I think I'd got a touch of the sun. The sadness of it was that I've talked to many cricketers of the 1950s, and when you ask them who were the best keepers, the two names that came up repeatedly were Arthur Mcintyre and Keith Andrew. They were the outstanding keepers on the county circuit. Godfrey was a showman. He turned it on for the big occasions, but day in, day out in county cricket, he didn't do it. He was one of those exhibitionist keepers throwing himself around. Keith played one further test match more than 8 years later. He was labelled as not having big match temperament, and he was so young at the time. Yeah. And that it was all down to this catch he was supposed to have caught off Arthur Morris, which he never felt he had a chance of catching. Many years later, at the 1980 centenary test at Lord's, Arthur Morris had come over and Keith found himself sitting next to Arthur Morris on a coach. And they got to talking about the game at Brisbane. And Keith brought up the catch and Arthur said to him, I nicked one before that and you didn't appeal. And Keith remembered a ball where something had happened, it had gone through, and he thought there was something funny about it. How history could have been different if he'd held that catch and Morris had been out for a duck. Those are the fine lines. People play one Ashes test rather than 50.
And that is the story of our one Ashes test wonders in microcosm. The cruel twists of fate that dictate success and failure, the if-onlys and the what-might-have-beens. It's time to move on. We've heard enough of English wicket-keepers struggling down under. Let's turn the tables and meet an Australian keeper on tour in England. Brian Tabor was born in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales in 1940. He played for his state for 10 years from 1964 to 1974, winning the Sheffield Shield in his first 2 seasons. He played 16 tests for Australia between 1966 and 1970. His one Ashes test came on the 1968 tour of England. Brian, welcome to Once Upon a Time in the Ashes.
Thanks very much, Graham. Pleasure to join you.
Yeah, really good to speak to you. Thanks for giving the time up. How did you get into cricket when you were a young man?
I was born in New South Wales country, which is renowned New South Wales for being very good with all sport. I went to school in Wollongong, which is an hour south of Sydney, and my father played a lot of sport, and he was keen for my brother and I to play sport. I loved playing my cricket. I was only about 8 or 9 when I made the local team to come to Sydney to play to a few games, and all of a sudden I liked the wicket keeping and batting, and I enjoyed that. So I was one of the many country boys in New South Wales that eventually finished up playing for New South Wales.
What drew you to wicket keeping?
The wicket-keeping side, often the youngsters at 9, 10, 11 aren't interested all that much in keeping. We were battling to have a keeper at one stage, and my dad, who was the manager, and said, well, listen, you better take the gloves and have a keep because nobody else wants to do it. Further it went, the more I enjoyed wicket-keeping. You're in the game all the time.
But it's quite a specific art, isn't it, wicket-keeping? Who taught you in your formative years?
My dad helped me with the basic skills, and then as I went along, I remember a few years later meeting Bert Oldfield, who was one of the Invincibles, who was Don Bradman's team. He was the keeper, and he was meticulous with his presentation and with his workload and so on. Then I had a few other people that helped me along the way.
You played for Gordon Cricket Club in New South Wales. What kind of age would you have been when you made your debut for them?
Just 16. We were still in Wollongong at that stage, out of Sydney, and Dad used to drive us up, my brother and I, each weekend to play for Gordon. And it was a long haul. The roads weren't as good in those days. The Gordon Club were terrific in those days, and some good senior players. One particular guy, Sid Carroll, played a lot of Sheffield Shield cricket and was very unlucky not to go to England, apparently, 56. But anyhow, I had some tremendous help from those guys, and I just loved my 20-odd years with Gordon. Whenever we came back from a tour or games, I'd always look forward to playing, which I've always recommended to young players. Mm. Whenever you come back home, make sure you don't forget who's put you there.
And Gordon has a strong history of producing test players, doesn't it? You mentioned Bert Oldfield and obviously yourself, but Victor Trumper, Neil Harvey, and more latterly Adam Gilchrist as well.
Yes. Adam had a year or two, and he played with my son Stephen and in representative cricket.
And from there, you progressed to New South Wales. How did the opportunity come about with them?
As you know, wicket-keeping, there's only one spot. And when that spot comes up, remember Wally Grout, he said, never give a sucker an even break. So if you've got a broken leg or a broken arm, don't say you're crook. I had to wait for a few years playing second 11 cricket and Colts cricket to Doug Ford, who was the wicket-keeper for Richie Benno and Alan Davidson in those years, because I came in 1 year after Richie and Alan retired. Those guys I know, and they've been great friends over the years. So it's just a case of working hard and hoping that when the opportunity arrives, you're in good form and get the nod.
And you were immediately involved in a winning side at New South Wales, weren't you? Because you won the Sheffield Shield in your first 2 seasons. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
You had a great impact on the team, didn't you? Look at that.
It was very nearly the test side at one stage in New South Wales. We were very fortunate to have such a strong side, which meant that you're coming behind a lot of good players. Had some tremendous help and guys to, watch what they do and copy them and this sort of thing on and off the field. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were at a function and we saw Ken Archer, the oldest living test cricketer at the moment, Neil Harvey as well, and he's only just behind him. But there were some wonderful people. As you know, you meet some wonderful people in cricket.
Before we get on to Australia, what were the highlights of your playing career with New South Wales?
There was one game in Adelaide. I had a good run. I got about 12 wickets, 9 catches and 3 stumps in a match.
And a run out as well, wasn't there?
I think there might have been as well.
You can take the credit for that as well.
Good on you. And I'm now at lunch on the last day of the game, and they'd done a pretty slick job and had a ball mounted on a little stand, and Sir Donald Bradman presented to me at lunchtime.
Oh, wow.
So that was very nice.
That's pretty special.
And that's also at one of my favourite grounds, Adelaide.
Do wicket-keepers think about stats in the same way as batsmen and bowlers? I mean, I guess it's difficult. It depends if the chances come your way.
That's exactly right. Sometimes you can have in your own mind that you've had, gee, I kept well today and I really had, and you've probably got 1 catch or something. Then another day, like the day you got this record, I got 12 wickets. Well, I mean, halfway through, I wasn't thinking of anything. It's nice. quite a few nicks coming straight through. Well, I mean, everybody should get them, any keeper. I don't think you think of that through. You'd be just putting too much pressure on yourself. You love to have a good day. You love to help your mates and take their wickets for them.
Let's move on to your Australia career. And as you say, it's very difficult because there's only one space in the team for a wicket-keeper. But a place did open up for you after the 65-66 season, didn't it?
I did play in the next series, which is after 65 when Wally retired. And that was to South Africa. Goes a bit up and down for the keepers for the next few years because Barry Jarman, who had been the 2IC to Wally Grout for 10 years, when Wally retired, the next trip to South Africa, he was unavailable for family and business reasons, and that gave me my opportunity. So I went to South Africa in 66-7. Gordon Becker from Western Australia was the other keeper. I got the first test match in South Africa and then kept in the 5 tests. And I think I got 8 dismissals in the first test. You know, that was a great start.
You did indeed. I was just looking at that. 7 catches and a stump in. South Africa won, but yeah, you had an excellent debut, didn't you?
We let him off the hook there, and Dennis Lindsay, keeper batsman for South Africa, had a great series. And there was some very dodgy umpiring dismissals in that year. But anyhow, that's by the by.
What were the main bad decisions?
Well, Peter van der Merwe in the first test he was on 0, and Dennis Lindsay was on 10, and we got him caught behind in front of first slip, given not out. Dennis went on and slogged away, and he got 180. We dropped a few chances too. Mm-hmm. I put one down, but all in all, it was very disappointing. But after that South African tour, then we came back, and for our domestic season the following year, Barry Jarman took back the spot as number 1.
Was that disappointing for you? Because you played all the matches in South Africa. Did you expect to play against India?
I didn't expect it, really, because I heard that Barry had sorted things out and he was going to be available. And I thought, well, he probably will take it back over, which he did. So he had the domestic series here. And then we went to England, and I went as deputy. Barry did a finger in the second test at Lord's. That's where I got the job to keep at Edgbaston in the third test.
OK, let's look at 1968 in a little more detail. Were you always confident of being selected for that tour?
No, I think I was fairly confident that I'd be one of the 2 keepers. I was looking at the England team a little earlier that we played against at Edgbaston. There was some test match, between them all with Edridge Boycott. Yeah. And I noticed Barry Knight we played against, and Barry's been a very good friend here in Australia for many years. He's been here forever and done quite a bit of coaching and so on with Barry over the years since then, along with Dougie Walters. Colin Cowdery, and from memory, he got 100 in the first innings, and I think it might have been his 100th test match. And Kenny Barrington, at the end of his career, Alan Knott and Ray Illingworth, Brownie, Snowy, and Derek Underwood. So it was a pretty useful lineup.
Did you mix with those players off the field once the matches were over, and did you get on with them?
Not a lot, but we did a bit. To us, when in our Shield days with New South Wales and the 4-day games and so on, at the end of each day, you'd find the team that was batting would come to the fielding team's dressing room with a couple of bottles under their arm to have a beer and chat about the day. And I think that's a big part of the game. Over the years, I think a lot of that has gone, and it's amazing how things, particularly on tour, by keeping that camaraderie with the teams, the number of invitations that are out for barbecues or a rest day, game of golf, and that's a very important part of the game. And it's amazing how much you can learn from each other.
And how about the match itself? What are your memories of that third test at Edgbaston?
In the first innings, I remember getting a pretty fair catch down the leg side off Eric Freeman. It was John Edridge, and John got 88, and you were always happy to see the back of John because he was a very good player. When I picked that up, I thought, because you just want to feel that you're pulling your weight. It was a good catch, so I was happy.
And then you got Boycott, didn't you, in the second innings? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's always good when you get boys.
Why does everybody say that?
What do you remember about that dismissal?
Very enjoyable.
Yeah.
But this was about the stage when Boyks was saying to one of the guys, I know I had a Johnny Gleeson. I've got him. I've worked him out how he spins, but don't tell anybody else.
Yeah.
Good team man, Boyks.
Yeah. And then it turned out as a draw, didn't it, that match in the end?
It was a draw, yeah.
Yeah. Then the fourth test obviously came around. Did you think, look, I might hold on to my place here, or was it always going to be Barry back for that one?
Always Barry back. If his finger was okay, you never give too much leeway to the next bloke.
But he was captain for that fourth test as well, wasn't he? I saw.
He was as well, because Bill Laurie, that's right, he was injured.
And what was it like to be a wicket-keeper in that era? Did you feel under pressure to score runs in the tour matches, or was it more about your ability behind the stumps?
The pressure started to come. Barry Jarman was a pretty handy batsman at times. From then on, it was started to turn a little bit, that it was becoming, with the one-day cricket, it was more important then for the keeper to be able to bat and get a few runs. The adage always was, pick your best keeper. Get a keeper that's going to miss a stumping or miss a catch, and he's got to get a 50 or 100 before he starts to make up for it.
How would you compare your wicket-keeping to Barry Jarman?
I always enjoyed keeping on the stumps. In New South Wales, I was lucky because we always had quite a few spinners. I put the standing back with the fast bowlers. Well, you've just got to be on your mettle and just watch very closely. But on the stumps, you've got to know your bowlers. And I remember in South Africa going to the nets after practice, having an extra half an hour or so, keeping the Ashley mallet. And Ian Chappell would join us. He'd just grab a stump and bat, missing a few here and there to put the pressure on me. He played for South Australia, and I didn't keep to him normally. That would help me get to know. He'd say, oh, look, I'll bowl an over of this, then I'll bowl an over that. And then he said, I'll mix them up. And this was great for me. Well, it's in his interest too, that I can pick him so that I can get him some wickets. So I don't like to compare myself with anybody else. I was very comfortable against the spinners, and I enjoyed keeping the spinners.
Who were the hardest players to keep to then, would you say?
Johnny Martin from New South Wales, who's a left-arm Chinaman, as they call him. He at times was good because he ripped them between bat and pad, big off-spinner. He could be very awkward to keep to. But I loved the spinners, and I loved Johnny Gleeson. My first game with John was in a Shield match. I hadn't seen him play before. We batted in the first innings. Once the game was underway for a while and we were batting all right, I said to Johnny, we go out into the practice nets, spend half an hour with me, just showing me your different deliveries. That made it a lot easier. After a couple of games, I could pick what Johnny was bowling when he was a couple of yards from the delivery strike, because of the little idiosyncrasies and the way he held the ball and so on. That makes it a lot easier. I saw little things that just trigger you as he was coming into bowl, little messages he's not giving intentionally, little messages that say, that's the wrong one, that's the toppy, that's the leggy sign.
Did you feel it was your responsibility as the wicket-keeper to keep everyone G'd up and making sure that everybody was fully concentrated at all times?
Not verbally. You see some of them now, they just get carried away a bit with too much verbal support. I think just a sensible part of encouragement and so on is good. Going over the top on that, you finish up driving your mate's mad, and the umpires will say, what the hell's he doing? I think there are different ways the keeper can encourage. Pats on the back between overs, a few words here and there, and as far as getting into the gamesmanship, as far as having a go at the batsman and this sort of thing, I was never interested in that.
Was there much sledging on the pitch during that era, on that 1968 tour, for example?
I think there's always a bit, but this sledging, how you interpret that, I don't know. But we used to play it hard. The gamesmanship bit, Ian Chappell walked past me, he'd say, geez, that pitch is looking a bit rough over there, Tabsy, so that the batsman could hear it, and that sort of thing. But nothing untoward. Oh, you jammy bugger, you French cut. The batsman might French cut a ball down the fine leg or something. Oh, you jammy bugger. Or the fast bowlers generally. look after that side of it.
So you're not a fan of mental disintegration?
Not really. I mean, you're not worth your squirt if you're going to let those sort of things worry you.
No.
I don't think you should be out there. I remember, if I can jump back, in the Gordon days, and Sid Carroll, who was at the end of his career when I started, but he'd say, "Hey, listen, tell your dad I'll take you back after the game tonight." But he said, "You just sit in the corner and just listen. Every team we play in the first grade, you've got a few senior players, and you find that in that social scene after the game, it's amazing the things you can pick up about players or by players. You just put that in the memory bank. You learn so much."
Would you seek out the opposition wicket-keeper specifically and have a chat with him?
No. I'd have a beer with him, but I wouldn't be worried about talking about techniques or this sort of thing. I just did my own thing.
Because Alan Knott was the wicket-keeper, I think, in '68, wasn't he? Did you think he was a good wicket-keeper?
Very good. At 1 year over there, when he kept Derek Underwood, he was brilliant. And I noticed one drill. It was up at Old Trafford, I think it was. He put a couple of stumps in the ground. One stump would be on about good length, and the other one was the bowling crease. And he'd get Derek to bowl 2 or 3 overs to him. He would stand on the one on good length, where the ball would actually pitch 2 or 3 yards in front of the crease. And he would go down in the crouch. He wouldn't move. It was good for Derek too, for his accuracy. He would just bowl them straight into Derek's arms on the half volley on that spot. And I thought, what a good drill. And you pick things up like that. There are always ways of improving. And at the same time, you're helping your bowler as well. And he was good off Snowy. Snowy was really sharp that year too. And he took some great catches off Snowy.
We've spoken a little bit about your batting. Do you remember batting in that Ashes test? You made 16 in the first innings.
I think I might have put Illy through the covers for 4. I enjoyed that. Still kicking myself for not working harder at it. That's the way it goes.
Just after that Ashes series, '68, obviously then you mentioned earlier that was the West Indies tour where Barry was back in the team. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, we mentioned Wally Gratt. He died of a sudden heart attack, didn't he, just before that series? Was that a big shock to you? Because he was very young, wasn't he?
It was, because I'd seen... we were playing a Shield game in Brisbane a week before, and Wally had come into the dressing room. He'd retired, and just to have a drink with us and so on. Then we went up at the Gabba. We went upstairs next door to the Cricketers Club, and we had dinner with Wal. He was working for Rothmans in those days. He'd just been down in Tasmania, so he called in to see us at the end of the game. He was staying the night and then going home up to Bundaberg, a bit up north later. We came home. 3 days later, he passed away. And he was only about 42, 43, I forget now, but we got a hell of a surprise. He was a good man.
Just to go back to the 5 tests then in India and the 4 in South Africa, when you had that really good run of tests, how did that feel to be established in the side then? Was that, I am the Australian wicketkeeper now?
Oh, it was a good feeling. I really enjoyed that. I had the 2 tours to South Africa. The first trip, my first tour when Barry Charman wasn't available, I played the 5 tests in South Africa. Then we went to, in 69, 70, we did the 5 tests and the 4 against South Africa. And that, that was a really good feel. That, playing 9 tests, you're there. I felt my spot was safe.
The South Africa tour, there was a bit of controversy about that tour, wasn't it? It was actually the last test they played for more than 20 years because of apartheid. Did that get through to any of the players? Did you feel comfortable going on that tour, or was there a bit of unease about any of the players about going?
No, we had no thoughts about apartheid at all. And when I say that, we didn't agree with that, but we were just there to play cricket, and I went back later to there, and with the Rothman Sport Foundation, I went back over there doing some coaching for a while, and we did a lot. They're lovely countries.
Okay, so just wrapping up your Australia career, as you said, you bookended it with the 2 South Africa tours. Did you feel after that last tour that it was going to be the end, or did you feel you had more Test cricket in you?
Yeah, I thought I had more. I was disappointed when I was given the nod for Rodney. That was the start of the the wicket-keeper batsman era, as far as I was concerned. With the records that he put up, probably a good decision.
And then you mentioned the 1972 tour of England. How did that compare to 1968?
It was pretty similar because I was the second keeper on both tours, because Barry Jarman had come back as the main keeper, and that's when I played the test when he broke a finger. And then in 72, I was deputy to Rod. You know, I just rolled with that because I just loved the game, and I just wanted to be if I wasn't playing, I just wanted to be a good team man in there. I remember up at Knott's, Ross Edwards said to me, "Hey, Tabsy, would you practice finished?" He said, "I'm not happy with that, my left foot, front foot drive and so on." I said, "Sure, let's get a bucket of balls." And anyhow, I threw him a bucket of balls. We had a chat, another bucket of balls. I think he got about 180 in the test. It was quite incredible, but it just shows whether it's in the mind, whether he's just sorted something out, and he finished that practice thinking, "Geez, that was good. That felt good, and I feel like runs tomorrow." So I was quite happy to do that extra work to help where I can.
I guess with the thing with those long tours back in the day as well, though, there were lots of tour games, weren't there? So it wasn't as if you weren't playing cricket. You got a lot of opportunities to play cricket as well. Yeah,
that is dead right. And I think it's a tragedy for cricket in all countries, really, England and here, that they don't play the States a couple of times. They don't play New South Wales country down at Wagga or Burke or wherever. And when we toured England, we played every county, combined universities, even going up to have a game in Perth, Scotland. And the first tour in 68, we played in Dublin and Belfast, a couple of one-dayers, which is good, you know, to spread the game and so on. And the people love their game.
When did you actually retire from cricket, and was that a difficult decision?
It was 74 I retired. I played one more Shield season after we came back from England in 72. 73-4 season I played, and I gave it away at the end of that because I'd accepted a job as the National Director of Coaching for the Australian Cricket Board, sponsored by the Rothmans Sport Foundation.
Well, that was great, wasn't it, that it came so soon and, you know, there wasn't a break. Obviously, you weren't playing, but I guess that's the next best thing, isn't it?
And the best part of that, really, or the most satisfying part of that, was a selector and manager of the Australian under-17 and under-19 teams for about 20 years. I took a team to the West Indies, which included Shane Warne and Damien Martin, and all the boys in it played for their states within the next year or two.
What was Shane Warne like on that tour? Could you see his potential?
There was one game at St Kitts. I thought, gee, this kid's got something. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that it would happen so quickly, because I was told at the start of the tour by the CEO of ACB that if this Warne plays up, send him home. Because I thought, shit, you know, what's he done? Obviously, there was no worry. And he was the player of the series from on and off the field, voted on by our whole team. But he had a great tour and he's a good team man. He then developed an incredible career, and as I say, it happened so quickly. And he was so versatile with the ball and had so much control and such a good cricket brain, which is expanding and letting us know all about these days.
Yeah. They say he's the best cricket captain Australia never had. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that. He just had an inbuilt character to know how to express himself to other players and to his own game. He just did it so well. He was great for the game.
How would you feel about keeping to Warne? Do you think you could do that?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to have kept to him. He also kept very well to him on India on one occasion. On some of those Indian wickets, he would have been pretty awkward. I still would have loved the challenge.
Well, just to finish up here, we've just spoken about one Ashes legend in Shane Warne. What did playing in the Ashes mean to you?
Every test something, but I'm so rapt that I did play a test in England. It was really a great thrill to play, and it also gave me the opportunity for my wife and I to come over there for the centenary test, because I'd played the test there, and that was a wonderful event, and catching up with all the English players as well. And The Poms did us royally over there. We had plenty of gin and tonics. I remember Mick Jagger liked them because I remember Mick was at Lord sitting down the front, knowing Mick was keen on the cricket. It got him to come up into the dressing room, meet the boys and relax and have another pint and watch the game from the dressing room.
Nice.
Which was great.
Yeah.
It was good. It was great.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it for today, having a gas in the Australian dressing room with Mick Jagger at the centenary test at Lord's in 1980. And somewhere else at the famous old ground that day, Arthur Morris was catching up with Keith Andrew and telling him about the one he secretly edged to him in Brisbane in 1954. The home of cricket must have been a buzz with Ashes memories. A big thank you to Brian Tabor for sharing his Ashes memories and taking us through his stellar career, and to Stephen Chalke for his wonderful insights into our three hapless keepers down under. As always, do visit the website onceuponatimeintheashes.com for some great images of our one Ashes Test wonders and lots of bonus material. Next time, our guest will be Roger Prideaux, who played in the fourth test of that 1968 series. I strongly recommend you tune in. Until then, I've been Graham Barrett, and this has been Once Upon a Time in the Ashes.